it were up to me, someone like you wouldn't be allowed to serve tables." The words rang out across the bustling lunch crowd, slicing through the hum of clinking cutlery and quiet conversations. Every head turned. The waitress froze. A plate of food balanced expertly in each hand. Silence fell like a curtain. All eyes landed on the scar, a jagged line etched from her left ear to her cheekbone. No one defended her. No one said a word. But then from a booth near the back, a teenage boy in a pressed military academy uniform stood. His face was tight with resolve, hands clenched at his sides. If you believe what happened was wrong, type unfair below. Tucker. Silence in the diner was thick, suspended like a held breath. Sarah stood motionless, her tray trembling slightly in her grip. The words still hanging in the air like smoke from a battlefield flare. Ethan stood taller, his face flushed with defiance. "You think you're a man?" he said, voice sharp and unwavering. "A real man doesn't tear someone down for a scar they earned protecting others." The man glared at Ethan. "What are you, kid? Her little bodyguard?" "I'm a cadet," Ethan said proudly, "and that means I respect honor. Something you wouldn't recognize if it punched you in the face." A few customers clapped quietly. Sarah's hand trembled as she set the tray down. She didn't want a scene. She hated them. But something about the boy's bravery struck her to the core. She walked over, her eyes fixed on the man. "Sir," she said softly, but with steel in her voice, "your meal's on the house, but I'd appreciate it if you left," he sneered. "You serious?" "I am," she said. "And if you've got a problem with my face, maybe take a good look at your reflection on the way out." That hit. The man scoffed, grabbed his coat, and left, muttering under his breath. The bell above the door jingled, a soft sound that echoed like a closing chapter. For a few seconds, the diner was still. Then a slow, respectful round of applause rose, one clap, then another, and then the entire diner followed. Sarah stood frozen, her face flushing, not in shame this time, but in something unfamiliar. Pride. Ethan stepped forward. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line, ma'am. I just couldn't let him say that to you." Sarah looked at him. Truly looked. Past the cadet uniform, past the nervous hands trying to act steady. She saw a boy who hadn't been taught to speak up, but had done so anyway. "You didn't cross a line," she said quietly. "You held it." Ethan smiled, a bit sheepishly now. "My dad, he was in the Navy, said you don't turn your back on the people who serve beside you, even if you've never met them before." Her throat tightened. She hadn't heard someone talk like that in years. It brought back memories, some painful, some comforting, of men and women she'd fought beside, of friends lost in foreign sand, of a promise she'd made to herself when she came back, to fade quietly. But maybe fading wasn't what she needed. After her shift ended, Sarah found Ethan sitting outside on a bench, fiddling with a worn-out copy of The Art of War. She sat beside him. "Your dad, he served recently?" Ethan nodded. "Afghanistan. Lost him 3 years ago. I guess I joined the academy to feel like I could still hear his voice, you know?" Sarah nodded, staring at the sunset. "Yeah, I know exactly what that feels like." He glanced at her, hesitant. "Is that where you got the scar?" She turned to face him, surprised by the lack of fear in his question. Just curiosity, just honesty. "Yes," she said. "Helmand Province, our convoy hit, an IED. I was the only one who walked away." Ethan looked down, then met her eyes again. "You didn't just walk away. You lived. That takes strength." The words hit harder than she expected. For years she'd worn her scars like shame. But in Ethan's eyes they weren't marks of damage, they were medals. They sat in silence. A while longer, two souls separated by age, but bound by invisible threads of loss, resilience, and a quiet defiance. Then Ethan stood. "Thank you for the fries," he said with a shy smile. "And for being you," she chuckled. "That's a new one. I'll try to keep it up." As he walked away, Sarah watched him go, a sense of warmth blooming inside her chest. The boy had no idea what he'd done, not just standing up for her, but reminding her who she used to be. When she went home that night, she opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside was her old military medal case, dusty, tarnished, and hidden away like a secret. She ran her fingers over the cold metal, memories rushing back in waves. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to remember she was more than the scar. 3 days had passed since Ethan stood up in that diner, but Sarah couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something about the way he looked at her, not with pity, not with fear, but with a kind of reverence she hadn't felt in years. It lingered in her mind as she tied her apron behind her back, glanced in the bathroom mirror, and for the first time in a long while, didn't flinch at her reflection. The scar was still there, but now it looked different. By the time her shift started, the buzz from that day had reached nearly every regular customer. People greeted her differently now, with respect, instead of awkward avoidance. Some even asked her about her service, their voices sincere. She didn't open up fully, not yet, but she no longer buried it. Midway through her shift, the door chimed and Ethan walked in again. This time, he wasn't in uniform. He wore a plain t-shirt and jeans, and he looked different somehow, less formal, more real. "Back for the fries?" she asked with a soft smile. He grinned. "Always. But also, I was hoping you'd help me with something." She raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" He sat at the counter, lowering his voice. "There's this ceremony coming up at the academy. Awards, speeches, all that. They asked students to nominate someone for a Community Inspiration Award. I put your name down." Sarah stared at him, stunned. "Me?" He nodded. "You don't have to accept it, but I thought maybe it's time people saw what strength really looks like." She took a long breath. Her first instinct was to refuse, to retreat into the shadows she'd built around herself, but the way Ethan looked at her, earnest, hopeful, she couldn't say no. "When is it?" "Saturday, afternoon. You'd just have to show up." Sarah hesitated for a beat, then nodded. "All right, cadet. I'll be there." Saturday came fast. Sarah stood in front of her closet, staring at the outfit she hadn't touched in years. Her dress blues. They were neatly pressed, tucked away behind civilian clothes and memories. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled them out. When she stepped into the auditorium, the room fell silent. Rows of cadets sat tall in their uniforms, and among them, Ethan stood at attention, grinning as she walked down the aisle. She hadn't worn these blues in almost a decade, but they still fit. A senior officer approached the podium. "Today we honor someone whose bravery didn't end when the war did. Someone who came home scarred but not broken. Someone who reminded us that courage doesn't shout, it endures." He gestured toward her. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Whitlock. Retired U.S. Army, this cadet corps is proud to present you with our annual Inspiration in Service Award." Applause thundered through the hall. Sarah froze. For a moment, it was all too much, the lights, the stares, the memories. But then her eyes found Ethan's, and she stepped forward. As the officer handed her the plaque, her voice cracked when she spoke. "I didn't expect this. Honestly, I didn't think anyone even saw me anymore. When I left the service, I tried to disappear. I thought my story ended overseas." She paused. The room was dead silent. But then a young man stood up for me. Not because I asked, not because I needed saving, but because he recognized something in me I'd forgotten was there, and in doing so he helped me remember who I was. Her eyes swept over the cadets. You may be young, but don't ever think you're powerless. The world changes when one person stands up for what's right. When she stepped off the stage, the entire corps rose to their feet. It wasn't just applause this time. It was honor. It was respect. It was healing. Later that evening, after the ceremony, Ethan walked up beside her as she stood near the memorial wall in the academy courtyard. "You were amazing," he said quietly. She gave him a warm smile. "So were you." They stood in silence for a while, gazing at the names etched in stone. "My dad's name is here," Ethan said finally. "I visit him after every milestone, tell him how I'm doing." Sarah nodded. "Let's say hi together." They both stood before the plaque, heads bowed. Sarah whispered a silent promise, not just to Ethan's father, but to every name on that wall, and to herself. "I'll keep going. I won't hide anymore." Ethan turned to her, his voice filled with something deeper than admiration. "You're not just a survivor, you're a warrior." She looked at him, tears welling, but they didn't fall. Instead, she smiled. "And you, Ethan, you're a leader. One day you're going to wear those bars on your shoulder, and you're going to make this world better." He blushed. "I hope so." "No," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know so." As the sun dipped behind the academy's spires, casting long golden shadows, they stood there, an unlikely pair bound by respect, sacrifice, and something timeless. As the academy bells chimed in the distance, Sarah and Ethan stood together. Two souls from different generations, joined not by blood, but by a shared code. Courage, loyalty, and the quiet power of doing what's right. The world outside kept spinning, unaware of the silent victory that had just taken place, not on a battlefield, but in the hearts of those who chose to see beyond scars, to speak when silence was easier, to honor the strength that lives in the shadows. Sarah walked away from the courtyard that evening, not as a forgotten waitress, but as a soldier once more. Not because she wore a uniform, but because she finally remembered that she'd never taken it off. And behind her, a young cadet watched her go, his spine straighter, his purpose clearer. Because sometimes, all it takes is one moment to rewrite a life. Sometimes, all it takes is one voice to remind the world. Heroes don't vanish. Sometimes, they just wait for someone to see them again. Thank you message. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. This story was written not just to entertain, but to honor the quiet heroes around us, those who walk among us with invisible wounds, silent strength, and stories too easily forgotten. If it moved you, remember, the greatest tribute we can offer our veterans, our defenders, and our everyday warriors is to see them, respect them, and when needed, stand up for them.